Hello everyone, this is Roman ShareShare, your number one resource online for buying properties. Today I'd like to discuss inspections, and particularly inspecting that your square footage is what you have on record. So we had an incident a few years back where we bought a property in Florida. We bought it at foreclosure, so it wasn't disclosed to us in any disclosures about any non-permitted additions. And so what we ended up doing, we bought this house and it was done really nice in that you couldn't tell that there was anything done unpermitted. But in Florida, they have something called sunrooms. And it's basically an outdoor patio that's screened in to keep out the bugs. And what happened at this property previously was they enclosed that sunroom and did it really well. You drywall. They put electric outlets in the enclosed patio in the sunroom, and they matched the roof line. You could not tell that this was not done with permits. You couldn't tell that this was done without the city knowing. So we walked into this house, and it gave 1 square footage size, and when we were there, it felt bigger. The house itself felt bigger. And so whenever you have a property that you're looking at, and let's say the house on record says 1,500 square feet, but it feels bigger, you want to be able to you want to have someone actually measure the house. It's called getting it taped. And an appraiser, during the appraisal process, was able to do that and truly measure the house and tell you exactly what the square footage is. This is extremely important. And the reason is this. If indeed there are areas of this home that were done without necessary permits, in order to get it permitted, or if later on you do something in the house, the city comes in to inspect it and then notices that you have unpermitted square footage, or a room that was done without permits, or something that was done without permits, they could actually cite you for it and make you bring it up to code. Okay? So this house that we bought, that additional enclosed screen room, enclosed patio or sunroom, was done so well that we couldn't tell. And later on, when we went to sell this house, it became a major issue for us. The buyer called the city to find out about whether the room was done without permits or everything was done with permits in the house. The city found out that there was this enclosure, and they red flagged the house. We had to then bring it up to code. Now, when we brought it up to code, when you're building, for example, an outdoor patio, the code specifications and requirements are different than a house and in enclosed square footage. And so what ended up happening, we had to rip that whole room out. We were trying to get it brought it up to code, but in order to do so, it required a certain amount of flooring and a certain amount of clearance from the floor with concrete and reinforcement, a certain foundation, and it required a certain elevation. You know, that room needs to be a certain amount of feet high, and in order to do so, we needed to raise up the floor and raise up the roof, and to do so, it was less costly to just tear the whole thing out and redo it. It ended up costing us over $20,000 in order to do this, and that's in Florida prices on a house that was between $150,000 to $200,000. In other parts of the country, it would have cost a lot more. So, very important, when you're purchasing a property, make sure that all the square footage is accurate. If it says 1,500 square feet on record, then ensure that it really is 1,500 square feet. If you have even a notion that potentially there's unpermitted square footage, you can go to the city, the Department of Building and Safety, the Department of Building, whatever the department is in your state, go there and ask for the floor plan. Some of these are available online. There's online resources for this where you can literally pull your floor plan online and verify that the house footprint is just like the way that it is when you're there. because this could be a very costly issue later on. If later on you're required to bring it up to code, you could see that how costly it could be, or you may just have to tear the whole thing out, and it's just a cost to reduce the square footage. Now, when you do reduce the square footage, it may have a big effect on the value of the property, right? Your property is based on a per square foot, and so when you reduce the size of that property, you're also reducing the cost, the value of the home. So, very important. Always verify this. It's extremely important when you're going through your inspections to verify the permits that were pulled on the house and the square footage. Now, if you uncover that indeed square footage has been added without permits, then your next move is definitely to submit a request for repair for the seller to bring it up to code or to rebuild it. And most sellers, they're going to have an issue with it. It's going to be very costly, and the seller will probably reject it. Now, if you make that request for repair and the seller rejects it, your remedy is either to exit the transaction, get your money back and your deposit back, or ask for a credit. You can get a credit and make this repair for yourself afterwards. But I wouldn't go into a transaction with unpermitted square footage because you're not getting all the value that you're paying for the property. And so it could be a costly mistake and something that could be an issue for you later on. Now, another thing is if you make this request for repair to the seller, you've disclosed to them, and if you provide them the documentation, as long as they have disclosure of known material facts, especially that where there's documentation behind it, they're required to disclose that to all future potential buyers as well. So when you provide this information to the seller, it's in their best interest to do this for you. We had to do this in Florida, even though we ended up taking a long time and we lost the seller. We lost the buyer that we were selling the property to. We were the seller. We still had to disclose this to the future buyers, and we actually showed them all the permits and all the work that we did. The same thing with your seller. If you find this and the seller, you make a request for repairs, but the seller is unwilling to do the repair and bring the property up to code, then at that point, they have a disclosure item they're going to have to disclose to all future buyers if you exit the transaction. It's really in their best interest. And sometimes they don't understand the disclosure requirements. Sometimes their agents don't even understand their disclosure requirements. And so it's important when you make this request for repair, you inform the seller and the seller's agent, the listing agent, that they're going to have to disclose this going forward. It's important and imperative for them to either fix the property or it becomes a disclosure item that will devalue the property going forward. So, very important. Make sure that the square footage in the house is correct. If it's not, if you feel like it's not, go to the city, get the plans, pull the permits, see exactly which permits were pulled on the property, and you can verify the footprint of the property, the blueprints of the property, to make sure that it is exactly the way that you are purchasing it. If not, go back to your seller, require for them to fix that, bring it up to code, demolish it, and provide you maybe a price reduction at that point. The property isn't as valuable, okay? Or the seller will have to disclose the fact that they have unpermitted square footage to the future buyer. This will save you a lot of money. It'll save you a lot of headaches, and it'll save you from having this same issue if you end up selling it to another buyer that uncovers this fact later on. Very important. So, as I always end with a quote, and the quote for today by Ellen DeGeneres, and the quote is this: "Sometimes you can't see yourself clearly until you see yourself through the eyes of others." Well, I hope today was helpful. I hope this tip, I know it's important. I hope it was helpful and important to you. If you want more advice and tips on how to buy properties correctly, make sure you visit our website, housebuyingblueprint.com, and reach out to us. Info@housebuyingblueprint.com. My name is Roman Shersher. your number one resource online for buying properties.